Zaid Jilani of The Intercept reported on a really interesting new study. He says here, a new study shows how American polarization is driven by a team sport mentality, not by disagreement on issues. So the research is from, I think, political scientist Liliana Mason. She's a professor at the University of Maryland. It was published by Public Opinion Quarterly, and it used 2016 data from Survey Sampling International and American National Election Studies. And listen, the basic idea is that people are fundamentally tribal in their nature and how they react to current events. And if somebody identifies with a label, then they're big on the in-group, out-group mentality. So if somebody says, I'm a conservative, or I'm a liberal, or I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat, well, then their whole political philosophy is built around in-group, out-group mentality with those labels. So if you're a Republican and issues are presented to you and framed in a Republican versus Democrat way, or Republican versus non-Republican way, you will circle the wagons and defend the Republicans come hell or high water. Same thing for Democrats, same things for any political label you can come up with. That's basically how people digest and think about politics. Now, what's interesting is that part is not particularly interesting, although it is a little bit interesting. But to me, the more overwhelming fact is that the issues don't really factor into it almost at all. So when you and I hear, like if somebody says, okay, I'm a progressive, or somebody says, oh, I'm a conservative, you and I, since we follow politics a lot, we tend to go, okay. So what that means, if you're a conservative or if you call yourself a Republican, typically what that means is you're more likely than not to be against abortion. You're more likely than not to be against gay rights. You're more likely than not to be in favor of, lower taxes on the rich. And you go down the list of all the different policy beliefs that are basically go hand in hand with being a Republican. Well, it turns out, no. People, if they say they're a Republican or they're a Democrat or whatever, that label comes before virtually anything else. And this is why, and they go on to point this out in the article, that Trump came along, and Trump, during the primary, he kept railing against war. There were multiple times where he was railing against war, and there were multiple times when he was railing against so-called free trade, and he was in favor of protectionism. That he was saying, let's not cut Social Security and Medicare. Those are positions that all buck Republican orthodoxy and the typical Republican position on the issues. Now, on the flip side, like today, you see the Democrats, not that long ago, as far back as 2013, virtually across the, down the line in the Democratic Party, the position on Russia was, we need to be in favor of peace and negotiations and not in favor of escalating, not in favor of sanctions, not in favor of NATO troops on the border. Now it's flipped. Now the Democrats are all really hawkish on Russia and they want to do more sanctions. They want to put more troops on the border. And they're not in favor of negotiations and peace talks. And so here's the point. The point is, as long as you give yourself the label, you're going to have people just by default, in a reactionary way, in a knee-jerk way, go, I'm with that person. So if I call myself a Democrat, and then I go and talk about how I'm in favor of all these classic Republican positions, just by virtue of the fact that I called myself a Democrat and I stressed the label, there will be a lot of Democrats who go, I like that guy. I agree with that guy. Why? He's a Democrat. So I don't agree necessarily with some of the conclusions of the report, and you could go read the article yourself and see everything and make your own mind up. But to me, the takeaway is, okay, then just don't talk about labels at all. Just don't talk about labels at all. Just tell everybody what you're for on the issues. And then if you force them to evaluate what you're saying only based on the issues, well then, I think we can get people to agree more with our philosophy. Because, and again, Trump proved this to one extent or another, but they're saying Trump got all this support with Democratic positions in some respects because he said, I'm a Republican, so the Republicans just kind of fell in line behind him. But I think you can get a left-wing audience and a right-wing audience by focusing on the issues that the poll results show they're overwhelmingly popular. And we've gone over it. 60% want to legalize marijuana. About 58% want to raise taxes on the rich. 61% want Medicare for all. 97% want a universal background check on gun purchases. So if you just decouple all these issues from the partisan angle and from the angle of labels, so just don't name the philosophy, don't label it, don't get into your tribal camp, but just talk about only the issues, I think we can probably transcend this flaw within human beings that just makes us want to kind of join a group and defend that group at all costs. So I'm hopeful. That's my reading of the situation. Perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps there's no way to escape the more tribal aspect of this, but I think there's sufficient evidence that points to the fact that we can overcome this. And I think the polling results on the individual issues, that's all the evidence that we really need. So just leave the labels to the side because that's the thing that really pisses people off, and only talk about the issues themselves.